So I'm gonna approach this in sort of four segments. One's going to be a look back to the very beginning of FMA, and I just turned 72 a week ago, and so I'm probably the oldest person in the room by a good bit. And I was not around at the beginning, so some of this stuff would be new for me, and I think it's probably going to be new for you. Briefly look at FMA today. I mean, I think we all know what FMA today is, so that shouldn't take a whole lot of time. But how we got to where we are today is interesting, I think. So we'll talk about adapting to change, and then I'll take a couple of moments to talk about looking forward and where we are there. So it's important, I think, to put the world in context. And FMA really came out of a meeting in 1969 at the New York American Finance Association meetings. So what was 1969 like? Except for Jay, none of you were born then. So there was a nice little piece in the Wall Street Journal. It was a book review, and it talks about National Basketball Association teams and what was going on in 1969. What was going on was they wore shorts that were really short. They had to pick up their own bags at the carousel. The sports writers who followed them had to use a phone book to look up the Western Union office so that they could wire their stories back in, okay? We had Richard Nixon inaugurated. Neil Armstrong took his one small step on the boom, and the Pontiac Firebird came out. Simon and Garfunkel in 70 were singing Bridge Over Troubled Water. Eric Clapton, about 8 years later, gave us Wonderful Tonight, and we were listening to folks like Bob Seger, Michael Jackson, ABBA, people like that. So that's kind of setting the stage. Oh, yes. And there was Oh Calcutta, which brought Broadway to a whole new level. There's actually a good story about that. Time permitting, you can ask about it, and I'll be glad to tell you, but I can't tell you right now. So John Fall of the Midwest, Les Strickler of Western, Al Sweetser of Eastern, and Dick Sussman of Southern met in New York, and they agreed that the national meetings were not devoting enough time to business finance, that much of the work being done in the academy was too theoretical and too mathematical, and that there was too little focus on applications of financial theory. So that was sort of the founding principles, if you will. 4 months later, April 18th, the Dow Jones Industrial Average stands at about 776. The S&P 500 stands at about 86. Now, you can put that in perspective to where they are today. And I think, personally, I think FMA is responsible for where those indexes are today. 26 finance professors met for dinner. At breakfast, not one of them had fallen asleep. And the outset of that was to form a new association, the Financial Management Association, that would focus on the field of financial management at the level of the firm, would hold an annual conference, and would publish a new journal, Financial Management. Now, here's where my philosopher comes in. I've picked Yogi Berra as my primary philosopher. He's probably one of the great minds of the 20th century. And what Yogi had to offer at about this point in time was, when you come to a fork in the road, take it. Okay? So I think that's what our folks did. First annual meeting in Denver, 1971, just under 300 registrants, 47 papers, 13 sessions in total, and lunch for that meeting was $3.50. The first issue of Financial Management's published in the spring of 72. And if you look at what you've got here, you've got an article on currency exchange risk as handled by the Singer Company. You've got some of the standard textbook issues that are there, but you've got 5 articles on various aspects of hospital finance and long-term debt, hospital financing in general, cost-benefit assumptions for hospitals, allocating hospital resources, things of that nature. So there's your first issue of FM. That's what they were looking at. Moving forward to the 80s, Yogi would tell us, you've got to be very careful if you don't know where you're going, because you might not get there. People were talking, using terms like chill out. That came about in 81. Cred, the ability to gain acceptance, that was in 81. Celebration by Kool and the Gang. Don't Stop Believing by Journey. Dolly Parton, Michael Jackson, Lionel Richie, Bruce Springsteen, Garth Brooks. one of my favorites there, the guy at the end of the thing from Gainesville, Florida, Tom Petty. So a lot of music coming our way that we were starting to listen to. 10 volumes into the future, jumping to volume 11, number 1. Looking at capital expenditure under inflation, pretty obvious why inflation was becoming an issue to scholars at that time. Projects with unequal life, divisional cost of capital, agency, personal taxes, and equity security pricing, option pricing models starting to sneak into play. The 1980 annual meeting from 13 sessions was up to 80 sessions, and you see the distribution of the sessions there. 26 on corporate finance, 18 on institutions, 17 on investments, etc. Going into the 90s, Yogi tells us you can observe a lot just by watching. The slang that we're using is spam, which, as you know, it's both a verb and a noun. You spam with spam. Your best friend was your bestie. And if you were the kind of person to induce negative moods in others, you were guilty of buzzkill. Garth Brooks was offering friends in low places. I'm not sure if that had to do directly with FMA or not, but it certainly could have. I see Jeff smirking just a little bit. Nirvana, Britney Spears, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Dave Matthews Band, Gloria Estefan, Madonna, a lot of music going on there. In that same early in the decade, the first issue of 1992 had 4 articles on leveraged buyouts, operating performance, inadequate capital, tax incentives, industry effects, article on board composition and shareholder wealth, and the effect of management buyouts on bondholder wealth. Those were the kinds of things that were coming out in the journal at that time. The 1990 annual meeting, 125 sessions, nearly 400 papers, 26 panels, and tutorials had made their appearance. So you see tutorials on corporate finance, of course, but also game theory, asymmetric information, advanced econometrics, corporate restructuring. Fast forward to the 2000s, we're starting to talk in terms of selfies. We no longer stop returning people's calls. We just unfriend them on social media. Faith Hill gives us the song Breathe, and Mariah Carey gives us We Belong Together. We're listening to Backstreet Boys, U2, Kid Rock, the Black Eyed Peas, Beyonce, Eminem, Santana. So now we're 30 years in to financial management, and now we're looking at compensation policy, stock splits, and short interest data, why firms diversify, value creation from equity carve-outs, and the Modigliani and Miller theorem and the integration of financial markets was a nice little commissioned piece for that one. The 2000 annual meeting, nearly 200 paper sessions, 24 special sessions, and 9/11. So just like with COVID, things happen. When things happen, things change. 5 weeks after 9/11, we were supposed to be meeting in Toronto. We didn't know what to do. Executive committee didn't know what to do. Phone call after phone call after phone call, trying to sort things out. Pew Research Center came out with a survey that said following this, a sizable majority of adults, 71%, felt depressed, 49% had difficulty concentrating, and 33% had trouble sleeping. So what did we do? We held the meeting. 1,600 people showed up. 2010, Netflix gives us bingeable, woke, a woke person who's educated and sensitive on topics, especially issues of racial and social justice. Now, that's very topical today. There's only one problem with that. Woke was first used in 1972. It just came into wider usage in 2018. Bruno Mars, Just the Way You Are. Pharrell Williams, Happy. Taylor Swift. Maroon 5, Ed Sheeran, Adele, Pitbull. Love the name of Pitbull. When you can go the rest of your life with one name, you've got to be something really special. Chris Stapleton. Financial management, 40 years in, looking at IPO underpricing. Sell-side analysts, stock splits in Switzerland, corporate governance, product market competition, wealth effects of R&D spending. 278 paper sessions. You see the trend here every year, going up and up and up. 828 papers accepted out of nearly 1,700 submitted. Where we are today, we're in a new decade, right? Great promise in a new decade, and then boom. December 31st, 2019, the start of our decade, if you will, we've got these first clusters of pneumonia-like illness. 3 weeks later, first case of COVID confirmed in the U.S. About 6 weeks, 7 weeks later, COVID is designated as a pandemic affecting 114 countries. So that's kind of where we are now. And as Yogi would say, it's like deja vu all over again. Our world changed in a lot of ways, and one of the great philosophers of our time, a person I turn to just about daily, Dilbert, offers the following thoughts on the way we communicate now. In the first panel there, just in case you can't read it, the speaker says, "Can you adjust your camera so I'm not looking up your nose?" Second panel, she says, "Okay, now can you adjust your lighting so you don't look like a light bulb with a beard?" In the third panel, the person on the other end of the call says, "How's my audio?" And she responds, "It's as good as your ideas." I think we know how good the audio was in that particular case. Volume 50, number 1, looking at Twitter activity, career concerns, and peer effects, the disposition effect in the option markets, advertising, investor attention, stock prices. I think the change in the subject matter that has appeared in FM over 50 years has just been fascinating to me. Couldn't even spell Twitter back in 1972. The annual meeting, and now we'll just go back to the beginning, and I picked the 2019 meeting in New Orleans because that was not affected by COVID, right? So just to compare those, 92 corporate finance sessions versus 7, 56 investment sessions. This is sessions, so times 3 for the papers. 31 financial institutions and markets versus 2, 6 international, 10 derivative sessions versus 0 and 0, 40 special topics versus 1. Okay, and just, real estate, insurance, education, you name it. Special panel, the academic job market in finance versus 9 panels on blockchain, post-crisis reforms, 2 on fintech, litigation, journal editors, CFTC, socially responsible finance, teaching risk management. Just the robustness of what's comprising these programs now is fascinating. Tutorials, empirical research, financial markets, creativity, innovation, asset pricing, big data, money management, behavioral finance, and then a bunch of other things like the doctoral student consortium, 6 sessions, paper sessions reserved for consortium participants on the main program, Cam Harvey giving the keynote address, a practitioner insights breakfast, the women's networking luncheon, which started as the women's networking breakfast, assistant professors breakfast, and then this FMA members and friends breakfast, which started as the senior statespersons breakfast many, many years ago. The one thing we don't have in 2019, we don't have it this year and probably won't have it next year, we don't have that $3.50 lunch. I think those days are gone. So how has FMA evolved? How has FMA adapted to change? And to me, this is the story of FMA. You've got this cast of thousands of members and friends of the association, and this cast of thousands has accomplished a lot. So we can start with special purpose programming, the consortium, the Outstanding Financial Executive Award, Women's Networking Luncheon / Breakfast, Senior Statespersons, Assistant Professors Breakfast, which is going on right now, and the Diversity Initiative that was started in 2019. Now this may not be all-inclusive. I've probably missed a few things, but those are some programming things that didn't exist 40 years ago. Some of them started to exist 30 years ago, et cetera. Conference refinements. We now use a system of track chairs. Used to be the vice president of the program did it all. One person did it all, and gradually added track chairs. Top 10 sessions now, keynotes, tutorials. We have awards programs that are very comprehensive. The Fellows program started in 2000. Paper awards at the meetings and other conferences, best paper awards in the journal. We've got our global portfolio. Started Europe in 1997, Asia in 2009, Latin America in 17, and the Middle East we're hoping in 22. So these are the things we're looking for, hoping that we can accomplish. These are just a partial list of the places that we met. You know, Zurich was our first meeting in 1997 outside of the US and Canada. And it's just been a roaring success, I think. Specialty conferences, my favorite, the wine conference where we partnered with UC Davis and Brad Barber and Joe Chin. They've been doing it for a few years, and we kind of rode their coattails. It's a great conference. Applied Finance Conference started in 2010. Some focused topic conferences on things like asset management, factor investing, derivatives and volatility. The virtual seminar series, topics like responsible investing, economic and financial implications of COVID-19, et cetera. Placement has evolved slowly, but the big change in placement, one, it hasn't changed, and that's been important. It's always been there. It's always been part of the fabric. But the other thing that's happened with placement is it was at the forefront of moving to a digital platform. So we learned a lot from placement that enabled us to do better digital activities as an organization. And the other thing that we've done in placement, continuing improvements in communications and access for users. So, every year tweaking it, getting a little bit better, but the foundation has always been there. Student programs for non-doctoral students. The National Honor Society has been around since '74. We broadened that to be more inclusive in '84 and actually started a conference for undergraduate and MBA level students in 1988, a conference that's been very successful. Publications, of course, financial management, but we've got the survey and synthesis series. FMA.org has become a really powerful content tool. If you haven't gone there and looked at videos and things like that, I encourage you to do so. A lot of good material there. And Curated Issues is a relatively recent innovation where leaders in the field have pulled past FM articles together on various topics and quote, publish those digitally. We had some failures, some good tries. Financial practice and education, we started in '91. Somewhere down the road, it transformed into Journal of Applied Finance. It just never got the traction that we had hoped it would get. We just couldn't get an identity, so it went away. Contemporary Finance Digest, Hawaii, 1997. We met in Hawaii in 1997, and it was just too damn hard. The doctoral students, the placement operation, it just couldn't work out. So I had a great time in Hawaii. I'm sure everyone that was there had a great time in Hawaii, but the board pretty quickly said, we're glad we tried it. We won't do it again, that kind of thing. Third-party relationships, Ajay alluded to some of them. We've had some very successful relationships. We've had some not so successful. We've had several we had to walk away from because they just didn't match up with our values. So going forward, and the good news is I'm getting close to being done, going forward, I see sort of four things that we're going to be looking at in the future, and all four of these things have been there in the past, they're here now, and they're going to be there in the future. So how can we continue to help members adapt to changes in their environment? Well, I don't know what changes you guys are going to be faced with over time. Maybe research funding, hybrid teaching models, new financial products, new market structures, new questions to answer, whatever it is. But FMA is going to be there, just like they were with 9/11, the 07-08 financial crisis, COVID. Okay, that's one thing that's there. You can always count on that. So that's an easy one. The second one is quality, inclusiveness, and transparency. Now, as everyone who's been at the board meetings can tell you, this is virtually debated every year. How can we improve quality? How can we stay true to our ideas of comprehensive, broad-based participation? So the first thing is to always remember that these are not mutually exclusive. There's a big overlapping set in these Venn diagrams that describe these two areas. Get the right balance, though, is not easy. There's no magic pill that you can take to make that happen. So FMA continually seems to fall on the side of provide the opportunity by means of a fair and open process for people of differing interests and needs to participate in presenting and discussing research. That's a statement that's proven very well thought out and very powerful over the years. FMA has done a lot of things to focus on improving quality and yet also improve access to the program, requiring completed papers for quality, switching to blind reviews to avoid school bias. We had some complaints back in the late 80s that, hey, we can't get our papers on the program because, we're not submitting papers from the right school. Well, the reaction to that was simple. Change the reviews to blind. Let the paper stand on its own merits. Improving the scoring system for track chairs so that they could do a better job deciding which papers to accept. Signal to people attending the conference what the papers that got the better reviews are by having the top 10 sessions. Not that they're going to be the best sessions necessarily, but at least at the review stage, they looked like they were really strong papers. Communicating expectations for presentations and responsibilities, tutorials, and then dissolving joint ventures when it was clear those joint ventures weren't working out in the interest of the association. And what I really mean there is in the interest of the association's members. Governance is an issue that both Ron and Ajay talked on preceding this. And if we go back into the 70s, membership was not what it is today. There were very few West Coast schools. There were virtually no schools out of North America. And many of the leading research institutions were noticeable by not being present in the activities. But by the 80s, FMA started attracting scholars from all sorts of places, not only internationally, but from leading research institutions. My personal belief there is that the doctoral consortium was really helpful in doing that. You started bringing in leading scholars that were not active in FMA. They saw what was going on, and they started getting active in FMA. So I think that was an impetus. Our global footprint in the 90s grew rapidly, and yet, again, people like Ajay, people like Jeff, people like me, you get old, and you've got to replenish that stream of things. So new talent's got to be necessary. Now, in putting this together, I got the minutes books out. I'm flipping through the minutes, and I'm just kind of looking, when did this happen? When did that happen? And you get caught up, reading the minutes. Oh, here's something that's kind of interesting. You read it. And what I came away from that little exercise with is that, first of all, we have big boards, right? There's a lot of people on the board. But the quality of the people that are on the board is really, really high. And I leave it to you. Define quality as you want to define it. Okay, it may be a great educator, it may be a great researcher, it may just be a great person, but the quality is really high. The change in the composition of the board over time has been phenomenal. It's a very dynamic process. So, you're not being run today by the same old people that were running it 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. It just continues to change. Diversity of interest among those that are at the board meetings. The quality of the debate and discussion, unlike Washington, D.C. today, it's, I'll take one side, you'll take the other side, but we don't throw things at each other. People listen, people are respectful, and people get swayed. People come over from this side to that side. The sheer volume of changes, experiments, and relationships that have occurred over time, I think is really an interesting aspect of it. So, what matters in this approach to governing? One thing that matters is members being engaged in reviewing papers, voting, volunteering, recruiting others to join and participate, casting a wide net and seeking persons to serve on the FMA board, and remaining aware of the diversity of our members and committed to providing fair representation for all and being welcoming to those who are not members. The last one was a founding principle of the association. In the early years, you see, let's bridge the gap between practice and theory. And you could certainly make an argument that FMA has failed on this foundational goal. If you look at our practitioner membership, it's never really been very strong. If you look at the research papers, that most academics write. They're not the kinds of things that practitioners read. And most conferences, in fact, I think all of our conferences, with a couple of small exceptions, are so heavily focused on academic presentations and academic needs that they're just not attractive to practitioners. So if these three are your metrics, then okay, we failed on these goals. But I view it a little bit differently. If we look at the practitioner world, practitioners are dealing with very complex situations with a lot of moving parts, and they don't have the ability to just assume away certain things. They've got to deal with the world as it is. Academics, on the other hand, are just about forced to reduce the size and the scope of the questions they're asking so that they can get a manageable question that perhaps can be answered by applying the scientific method to it. So you do have two different worlds there, and those different worlds may require some special efforts in terms of how do we bring these worlds together. My view is that FMA is succeeding in bridging the gap, and we're doing it by building bridges, and those bridges are based on ideas and communication. Okay, they're not based on membership and the other things you saw on the other page. The way these bridges work is they serve to get content from practitioners to academics, and they serve to get content from academics to practitioners. That's what a bridge does. It runs both ways, and it's working, I think, extremely well. If you look at the positions at the board of Vice President Practitioner Services and the practitioner directors on the board, they're always developing content in terms of panels, roundtables, helping with specialized conferences, et cetera, that bring practitioners into the conferences. The Outstanding Financial Executive Award has had, I think, a very positive effect on the association for reasons I'll get to in just a moment. And the Survey and Synthesis series, I think, is the crown jewel in terms of our efforts to get information from academics to practitioners. So the Outstanding Financial Executive Award, it's given every year. This is just a small sample. But if you look at the first award recipient, John Phelan, chairman of the New York Stock Exchange at the time, 3 years later, he was basically heading up the effort to help the markets keep from melting down based on Black Monday in '87. So he was at the forefront of that. Boone Pickens, he was speaking to our conference on Friday in October 1987 as the markets were starting their meltdown. I'm running behind the head table there, and he's talking with one of his guys, and they're doing all of this kind of stuff. And what are you doing? He's buying puts, okay, as he's getting prepared to give his remarks to the association. Gary Brinson on the investment side, Alan Taylor from the Royal Bank of Canada. Royal Bank of Canada has been a huge supporter of financial economists over the years. Anthony No of the Hong Kong Securities and Futures Commission. John Bogle needs no introduction. Janet Yellen, I'm sure she's in the paper today. I'm sure she'll be in the paper tomorrow, and she certainly was in the paper yesterday. Cliff Asness, sort of a closet academic, if you will. Roger Ferguson, who manages a lot of your retirement money. These people have come in, they've had interesting stories to tell, interesting insights to offer, and it's made for a nice way to just kind of sit back and relax and hear the thoughts of someone who has done it, is doing it, and is willing to share those things with us. But here's the crown jewel in my view. And I didn't realize this. I don't know how many of you know exactly what the Survey and Synthesis series is, but what you do is you find someone, you find a topic that you think is going to be interesting to practitioners, then you go try to find someone who can survey the literature pretty comprehensively and then can turn that into a book that pretty much says, from a practitioner's perspective, here's everything that you need to know about this issue, okay? Until Michelle got me the numbers, I didn't realize that we had over 30 titles in print. And I didn't realize that we had sold 140,000 copies of these books. And I didn't realize that total sales were nearly $4 million. Now, FMA didn't get that $4 million. I mean, big chunk of that goes to the publisher, obviously. Big chunk of that goes to the authors. And I think FMA, as I recall, we'd get something like 2 to 5% of sales or something like that. So, it was an amount that allowed us to do not much of anything. But those are pretty big numbers for an organization like this. And here are the top 5 selling books in terms of units sold. Larry Harris's Trading in Exchanges, it's been out since 2002, nearly 50,000 copies. I was pretty impressed with that when I saw that number. And this is not going to make the New York Times bestseller list, but then again, there's a lot of things on that list that wouldn't make our list either. Hersh Scheffner, talking about behavioral finance and investing, 28,000 copies. Andrew Ng's book that came out in 2014 on factor investing and asset management. Gary Gorton's book, Slapped by the Invisible Hand, The Panic of '07, 7,700 books, and a relatively recent book by Kerry Back on asset pricing and portfolio choice, 3,000 copies. So these are the kinds of things that are out there, and there's 26 plus other books that are out there. So I would make my argument, if we were arguing, that we're doing a heck of a good job of building bridges, both in terms of bringing practitioners in to talk with us and engage with us, and in terms of getting academic thought distilled into an accessible form that practitioners are willing to use. So, in closing, what is FMA? Why is it done well? What does the future hold? So, FMA is a community, and you can look these definitions up. Communities have shared values. It's a platform that helps people accomplish a variety of goals. It's a forum for the presentation, discussion, and debate of ideas. And I want to turn to another great philosopher here, Michael Crichton, who passed away a couple of years ago. He gave this lecture at Caltech, and if you haven't read it, it's here in the footnote. It's the title of the presentation at Caltech was Aliens Cause Global Warming. So just Google that. It's a fun piece. But the quote that has come out of that is, if it's consensus, it isn't science. And if it's science, it isn't consensus, period. And I think that captures a lot of what you try to do at a conference like this. You try to make sure there's plenty of room for debate. And then finally, and perhaps most importantly, FMA is a meeting place where you can reconnect with friends and colleagues. So why have we done so well? It's a member-driven organization, very importantly. Ajay and I were talking about this at dinner last night, supported by a very competent and very dedicated staff. And I've deliberately chosen not to play up the dedicated staff because I think everyone here and everyone that might listen to this knows exactly how dedicated and how much work these folks do. They do a great job. But sometimes I think we fail to appreciate that this is a member-driven organization and that an awful lot of work gets done by members who review papers and so forth. FMA is flexible. 51 years, FMA has adapted to change. It showed a willingness to take risks, to try new approaches. We've got core beliefs and values that basically have not changed. If you go back and read the minutes of the very early meetings, you're seeing the same things talked about and supported today. And when a decision needs to be made, it seems like we always go back to some of these core values. Finally, FMA members, and I can't stress this too much, are just very generous people, very willing to help make the association better, and by making the association better, by making members better, making the profession a better place to be. So what next? I don't know. FMA is going to be there. Future's bright because future's in your hands, just like it was 50 years ago. And as Yogi might say, just remember, it ain't over till it's over. And that's it. So I have time for questions if anyone has a question. Gosh, well, you know as well as I do that, so who are some of the early presidents of FMA? Fred Weston was president in 1980. Bob Johnson, I think, of Purdue, might have been the first president. Gene Brigham was early on, because I think Gene may have organized the 70 conference and then migrated into the presidency pretty quickly thereafter. Bottom line, a lot of people that were very well known at that time, but, not quite as well known now. Okay, there being no more questions, meeting adjourned.